Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bloom. We are doing this show and filming today from Washington, D.C. And I am so happy to be here with you all. I want to thank Cheryl, Shannon, Tammy, and everyone else for attending today. For anyone who has not attended our live shows before, this is a very interactive platform, and I want to encourage you all to enjoy the experience with us. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, please type them into the chat box. This time is for you, and this is definitely going to be a good one. So, our next guest, Paula Dobrich, is the founder of Happy Nutrition in New York City, and she is a dietitian. She's a former model turned dietitian. And I am so excited for you all to meet her and for us to dive into this discussion. The world of food and consuming and what we should be consuming and how our body works and how our body responds to food can sometimes be confusing sometimes. And that's why it's wonderful to talk to the experts and to see their experiences and to get their advice to learn what diets actually work and if a diet is actually something that we should be trying to shape our lives around and what healthy eating patterns looks like. So she's done a lot of great work with people who've had diabetes, doing tons of research, and she's just a great business owner and dietitian, and one who is very much so passionate about the work that she's doing. So I cannot wait to introduce you all to Paula, and I'm just going to go ahead and bring her out. Welcome.
Hi, nice to be here and see you all.
Yes. Nice to see you too. So, for everyone who has not met you yet, can you tell us where you're from?
Yes, so I am originally from Germany, and my parents both immigrated to Germany from Poland. So I'm first generation German, and now I'm in New York. So it's
Wow, that's
influence. Yeah.
amazing. So, how old were you when you moved to New York City?
I just moved to New York about 3 years ago in summer 2018 after having lived many places. And I also lived in two different states before moving to New York. But I kind of fell in love with the city. I also started my master's degree here at NYU. And then I just stayed.
Wow, that's exciting. I don't know if anyone here has ever been to New York, but it is just a beautiful city, and I know I'm sure you just love it.
Yeah, it's nice. It's very dynamic and diverse. And I think there's just anything you would want, you can find it here. So I think that's what really attracted me to New York City.
Absolutely, I can definitely see that. So tell us about your modeling career. How did that all start? And how has that influenced you as a person today?
Yeah, so it started as an adventure, really. It was when I was very young, like 12, 13. I was getting asked by a few scouts in like shopping malls or on the street. They were asking me if I ever considered modeling, and it made me think. And I asked my mom, and we went to an agency, and I signed. And it was really just a fun adventure at that point. I mean, I was 13 years old. And then when I was 15, I transitioned to a more serious agency, and they started really pushing me to. They were preparing me to go to Paris once I turned 16, because that's the legal age where you can go, and that's kind of where everything changed, where it became so serious. And they also, because I was 15, my body started changing, and they put me on a diet because I need to be in shape for Paris. So today, knowing the things about nutrition that I do, I know that as a 15-year-old, being on a like 1,500 calorie diet was definitely not a good idea.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's where it really started for me, the experience with food that really shaped where I am today, because I started really obsessing over diets and having to be in shape and what should I eat. And I was always looking up all those trends and cleanses, and then just like going crazy with food because I was so hungry, and then going on that cleanse before a job again. And it was just really that was a part that I really don't miss. However, modeling was also very fun. It allowed me to live in many places. I ended up living in almost, I think, 6 countries. Yes, and yeah, visiting many more, meeting a lot of exciting people. So I'm not gonna say it was all horrible, but definitely the eating part shaped me and inspired me to be where I am today.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice balance, a nice balance. And I'm sure, like you said, it inspired your business and the work that you do heavily. I love that you mentioned when you were actively modeling about the diets and all these different fads and things like that. Because, you know, it brings me back to like when I first had my first child. And as soon as I gave birth, the number one thing that seemed like it was in my head is getting back to a size 6. And these beauty standards are just so unhealthy, and this pressure that we place on ourselves and in media. This conversation about nutrition is so important. So that's why I'm so happy to have you here, so we can have this discussion, because I think a lot of times it affects women the most, and it can affect our, you know, our confidence level as well. So can you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the problem is that we are constantly made to think that we should be shrinking ourselves, and the smaller the better, the less food the better, the less calories the better. And actually, one of the most common mistakes people make when it comes to eating is not eating enough of, energy and a nutrient, a certain food group. So it really is sad that we still live in this mindset that's very old school, that we should just keep doing less. And even those things, like, our bodies are meant to change, they're meant to be different. Women are not supposed to look like 12-year-old kids their whole life.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good point. And that point about, you know, eating more is actually better for our bodies. We have a fitness trainer here as well, so I'm sure she definitely connects with exactly what you're saying. So before I get ahead of myself, but I want to ask you, can you tell us about Happy Nutrition, and what inspired you to start this amazing venture of yours?
Yeah, so I mean, the name is very playful. It's happy, but with a P, like the vegetable. So it's a play on the word happy and peace, and like to eat more vegetables. But it's also it's also just kind of, the name is supposed to be fun and playful because I really want to show people that nutrition is fun and enjoyable, and it's not really as serious as we think, and it's not a punishment or that thing where we constantly have to just starve ourselves. and
Mm.
as I said, my biggest inspiration was really my experience with the dieting, with the mindset, with that. It took me a really long time to get away from that mindset of like always having to be on a diet and then bouncing back, because that's really what happens to your body, where if you restrict your energy intake below a certain point, your body's going to fight back. So then that's why whenever we lose 10 pounds quickly, we gain back 15 or 20, because your body just keeps fighting back. And that really is, it does feel miserable. And so I wanted to kind of, and I saw all my friends struggling with the same. It's like models are always seen as those like perfect creatures, and they never, like, they can eat whatever and they never have any problems. And of course, we're still like very thin, but it's a different standard. We're still being told by our agents and clients that there's a little bit too much here and too much here. And so I saw all my friends doing the same thing, going through the same misery, and always being scared of foods, being scared to eat certain things, or scared to like gain 2 pounds of weight, or like horrible things.
Wow, yeah.
And just and then seeing that there's really not a lot out there. Even when I was trying to get, I was honestly trying to eat healthy, and I was bombarded with this crazy amount of misinformation, people trying to sell me diets, superfoods, supplements. And of course, I fell for all of it because I was totally in that mindset. But so I wanted to create something where people can go and find reliable information, That's not about selling a powder or a diet. It's more about helping people heal their relationship with food, while still, of course, providing that reliable, that solid nutrition information, and also where we can just find that fun with food again. That
Hmm.
we should be a good, positive part of our lives, not something that is negative and stressful.
Oh, absolutely. I do totally understand. So for someone who's never sat down with a dietitian before, can you tell us what's the primary focus for you as a dietitian, and what's the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a lot of different paths that you can take as a dietitian. Dietitians can work in all sorts of jobs and different areas. So there's clinical dietitians who work in hospitals. There's culinary dietitians that develop food products or work in kitchens. There's research, marketing, really many areas that you
Oh.
can go into with that career, which is why it's fun, because anything in relation to food and nutrition that fascinates you, you can pursue it as a dietitian. But I decided to work in private practice, so um, it is kind a little bit clinical, but not as clinical as it would be in a hospital. It's working with people with health conditions, or helping them lose weight, and just looking at them holistically, really, not only just food and calories in, calories out. It's the whole person. It's so much more than food. It's the lifestyle factors, the amount of sleep that people are getting, the amount of stress that people have in their lives. We really look at all of that in the nutrition counseling session, because it's so important. Sometimes there's people who eat perfectly and their health is still not great, because there's so many other factors that just influence how they're able to function. So yeah, that's what I do. I just see clients one on one, and I try them to get better. I work with a variety of clients. I don't really have a very specific focus on who I work with. Some dietitians do have that focus, where they focus specifically on people who have celiac disease, or who are diabetic. I take clients with almost any conditions, or just weight loss or self improvement. I'm very open to that. And the difference between a dietitian and nutritionist, really, there is a huge difference. I'm glad you asked that. Because so a nutritionist, actually anybody can call themselves a nutritionist, and a lot of people don't know that.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah, so you could basically go out tomorrow and create a website and say you're a nutritionist, and there would be no consequences with that. The title isn't regulated by any entity, so it
that.
really doesn't require any education, anything. A lot of people do have education, and they just didn't pursue the registered dietitian title. So it doesn't mean that anybody who's a nutritionist is bad. Like, you can always look up people's credential, like their education. A lot of those people do have a degree in nutrition or some certification, because the path to becoming a registered dietitian is tough, and not a lot of, like, not a lot of people, but some people just don't want to pursue it. It's also sometimes just not available to people for many reasons. So you need the degree, at least a bachelor's degree, and starting 2024, they will require a master's degree for all dietitians.
Oh, wow.
And there's a special program, it's called didactic program in dietetics, that you have to complete. So that these are classes that are specifically overseen by the credentialing body for dietitians, and they make sure we learn the right stuff in those classes that we will need later on. And then once you complete all those classes, you can apply to a dietetic internship, which is, I think, at least 1,200 hours of supervised practice. So they range from 6 months to 12 months of an internship. and you go through all those areas where dietitians could work in. So it's you have to be in a hospital, then you do some food service, some community work, and you're trained in all these areas. And once you've completed all those requirements, which is,
Wow.
you have to write the exam. So you have to sit for the registration exam. And then when you pass that, you're finally done and you can be a dietitian.
Oh my goodness. I had no idea. I mean, you're educating me on this as well. I mean, people, let me know in the comments. Did you have any idea that anybody could call themselves a nutritionist? I honestly did not know that. I will definitely admit that, even on the discussion that I am hosting. I did not know that. But I'm grateful for this conversation because now I do know. So let's talk a little bit more about food addictions and what should we be looking for when we're actually going to the grocery store and we're looking at the label? And why is it important for people to have a comprehensive understanding of food labels and the effects of food on their body?
Yeah, I think that knowing food labels is super helpful for people because the food label can be a very quick way to scan a food and kind of understand what is it giving me or not giving me, and how will it influence me. So especially with the new label, there's a few things that I always like to point out to my clients. So now they have specifically a rubric for added sugars, which is great because it helps us. There's a lot of foods that naturally have sugar, like if you look at rice or something like that, it will have sugar because carbohydrates are sugar. But now we have that distinction between sugar in the food and added sugar. And so that
Mhm.
added sugar is just white sugar or syrup or whatever. And that is something that, of course, I always tell people to limit. Or if there's a product, if there's two products and one has more or less sugar, then of course take the one with less sugar that's been added. And things like how much fiber is in the food, or how much sodium is in a food. Those things are really important to keep an eye on, because I mean fiber is great, and then too much sodium is not so great. So that food label can really give us very useful hints, or when making a decision between product A and B. It's also a really helpful tool. Um, so yeah, I think that's all I have to say about food labels.
Let's talk a little bit more about sugar, though. Sugar, from what I've heard, is highly addictive. Is it good for you?
Well, so there is a lot of information about that out there, and I have not um, I have not personally been involved in any research regarding sugar and addictions and food addictions, but there's a lot of conflicting voices in that area where a lot of people are saying that an addiction isn't necessarily the right word for it because um, even food addiction in general doesn't meet the diagnostic criteria for an addiction. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not really fair to group it together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because like in addiction, there's like certain, like with any psychological disorders, there's like certain diagnostic criteria, and um, it's just not really fully the same.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not gonna ruin your life and because you're addicted to sugar, it's
Right,
just
right,
you're not gonna end up in the hospital with delirium because it's just a very
right.
different kind of mechanism. However, it is true that sugar stimulates some areas of the brain that are also responsible for those addictions, like the pleasure, the dopamine is being released, and that's why people kind of make that link that it's the same area of the brain that's being stimulated when we eat too much sugar. The problem with that is also that the same area of the brain is stimulated when we hug people or when we are intimate with our partners. It's just a pleasure center. So I think you can be addicted to anything really, but I don't know if it's as easy as people sometimes make it look. Because just because your pleasure center is being stimulated, does it necessarily mean that it's something that's going to harm you in the end, or you're going to get addicted to it? Um, so there's a lot of
Yeah.
waiting things, and that's really like that's one of the things that people sometimes don't see about nutrition, that it's super complex and there's always a gray area where you never know until there's super solid evidence. So the area of like sugar and food addictions is very interesting right now, but I can't really give you a yes or no answer to this one.
Okay, no problem at all. So can you tell us about, you did a lot of research on the prevention of diabetes in the past for teenagers, with teenagers in mind, actually. Can you tell us about the research that you did, why you were passionate about it, and what led you to actually take on that venture?
Yeah, so I do have a my master's degree is in public health nutrition, and I decided to kind of add on the public health um, edge to my education instead of doing a master's in clinical nutrition, because I wanted to be able to share information with people. Like I said before, I wanted to be a good resource. I wanted to kind of work against that misinformation that is everywhere. And I thought that public health and getting more skills in research and understanding research, conducting research would be the best way,
Mm,
because public health programming is usually aimed towards big groups of people. It's those big campaigns promoting healthy eating, and also very that huge focus on research, which I think is very important to be able to share reliable information, to really understand, like look at a study and understand what they did, not just read the conclusion and fall for whatever they wanted.
right, yeah.
So so that's how I got into research. And throughout my master's degree, I had a lot of opportunities to work with different research programs, and this one I did at Mount Sinai here in New York. It was they were testing a prevention program for pre-diabetic teens, actually. So they were scanning teenagers for pre-diabetes, and they were trying to help them prevent that progression towards diabetes, which was a great program. And they were doing it through a peer support program with nutrition education, and just providing basic information, because most of them had no idea that they are pre-diabetic. And actually that study was helping them understand what does it mean. A lot of them were just told by their doctors, oh, you have high blood sugar, whatever. But
Yeah.
we were actually the ones who were saying, see, this could happen if we don't change it, and here's ways what you can do. And a lot of them actually took it very seriously, and they really wanted to change once they understood their situation that they're in, and what the ways are that they can help themselves.
Yeah, that's, I mean, obviously sounds like you're doing amazing work and you're changing lives. I mean, anytime that you can, help steer somebody in the right direction to healing their bodies, I mean, and lengthening their lifespan, I mean, I don't know who wouldn't appreciate that. So for anyone here today who may not be aware of what pre-diabetic or pre-diabetes is, can you explain that for us?
Yes, so it's basically there's different parameter, like measures that define what is normal blood sugar, what is abnormal blood sugar, but not diabetes yet. And then starting at a certain point, we just diagnose diabetes, because it's after, like, if your fasting blood sugar is over a certain amount constantly, then you get the diagnosis diabetes. However, if it's just kind of elevated but not really there yet, now that's kind of pre-diabetes, where it's not too late to get that under control, sort of, with but that's only applicable to type 2 diabetes, of course, because type 1 diabetes is autoimmune, genetic, and it's not really something that we can control.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, can you tell us what are some preventative measures that people can take that may be, like you said, predisposed, possibly genetically, to diabetes?
Yeah, so diabetes, it's usually if we develop it, like the type 2 diabetes, that is a response to lifestyle factors usually. Um, that is usually in response to um, constantly having elevated blood sugar from what we eat, and but also there's a link between that developing diabetes and high fat intake. So generally, just those diets that are not recommended. And some things that really help are, of course, a healthy diet. So a lot of fiber helps. That's something that really helps control blood sugar because um, even when we do eat, it's like the fruit has too much sugar argument. Um, where we always tell people as dietitians that yes, fruit has sugar, but it also has fiber, and fiber helps you absorb that sugar very slowly, and that way you don't have a spike in your blood sugar. It's just like pretty stable. So fiber is really great for stabilizing blood sugars. But then there's also lifestyle factors that are probably even more important because stress plays a huge role. We now are finding out more and more about how much stress impacts people. Chronic inflammation is a huge factor. And that can be due to diet, but also due to lifestyle factors like exposure to environmental toxins or stress or things like that. And then there's also physical activity, which is very important for having that healthy insulin response. There's a lot to it. And then there's also, health disparities in general, where a lot of people just don't have the access to healthcare or education. Like when we were working with those teenagers, they were all from Harlem, and they were Latino children in Harlem from lower income families. So that was like a very specific group, which in that area has higher rates of diabetes. And we're kind of looking into why is that. And really, the problem is that a lot of people just don't have, once you tell them, once you educate them, they understand and they're going to do the right thing, but they just don't have the access to the information, and they don't know until it's too late. And I
Yeah.
think that is where it comes in. Like once we remove those disparities in access to information and healthcare, we might not see differences in like where people live or like their race and incidence of diseases, because I think that's a huge factor.
Oh, yeah. You bring up a very good point. I'm sure it is because, when I used to spend a lot more time in New York City, and hopefully it's gotten better now, but certain parts of New York City would have food deserts. Communities who didn't have access to like fresh produce, for example, the basic necessities in life that we need to fuel our bodies. Lower income communities didn't have access to it. So, they would just have, canned string beans and things like that, and Vienna sausages, the items with a lower nutritional value. And I mean, hopefully things like that have gotten better, but I would assume that that may have contributed to, some of the health issues that people in that community have had, and also, lack of education, like you said as well.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's another project I worked on actually. I
Really?
I worked with the American Heart Association here in New York for their needs assessment 2020. And their biggest focus was food insecurity, because especially throughout the pandemic, it has gotten extremely bad, and actually worse than it was before, because the pandemic hit New York hard in that sense. And yeah, so the food deserts are still there, and still a lot of children and especially women are impacted by food insecurity here in New York. So it's a problem that's ongoing, unfortunately.
Mm. And we have a question from Barbara. As we bloom into our senior years, should we avoid or eat more or less of certain foods? Great
Senior
question.
years, as in
Senior,
how?
when she become like, you know, senior citizen over 60, should they
Oh,
avoid eating certain foods?
I think really there's no foods that are age dependent. Sometimes we start losing like we start perceiving flavors as less intense. That's sometimes a problem as we age because our taste receptors aren't as sensitive anymore. So a lot of people like to use more spice, which sometimes then people end up using more salt, which is not great. So that's something to pay attention to. If you're like starting to feel like you need to add more salt, just try other ways to spice up your food because it's pretty
Yeah.
normal to need more flavor in your food as we age. And then, I mean, I think it's just important to stay hydrated. That's one big problem with people. I even see it with my mom. Like she drinks less and less every time I see her because
Wow.
it's just your body stops sending you those signals as consistently as it used to. And but otherwise, really, there isn't much when it comes to foods. I know there's um, a lot of controversial information out there about soy foods and menopause and things like that, but really there isn't enough evidence to make any very solid recommendations, especially as general, like everybody with a certain in a certain age group should do X. It's very personalized. So yeah, I can't really think of much.
I have to ask you, what are your thoughts on? So there's so many different diets that's out there right now. But one that's extremely popular is the keto diet. I know a lot of people who say who they, you know, they've had success with it. But what are your thoughts on it? And are carbs really that terrible?
Well, I mean, I would have a lot to say about this, but we don't have all the time in the world. So I'm going to try to keep it short. The keto diet is one of those trends, and really, of course, like the keto diet started as a therapeutic diet. So it was used for epileptic children, actually, and it was very, very effective. Um, but not for weight loss, just for controlling seizures and reducing those symptoms. And it was, of course, never done at home just like that. It was prescribed by physicians and controlled. And so, and now it's just this weight loss diet, which people swear by. And actually, real keto is really hard to do. I think a lot of people are not really doing keto, they're actually just doing low carb because you really the amount of carbs that you're allowed to eat on the keto diet is so small that I really don't think people are reaching that amount because even things that people eat, I don't know, yogurts or things like that, and I think it's just protein, but dairy has lactose and that's a sugar, and you're probably over your carb ratio just by having the dairy, things like that, and but not even that. It's just of course the weight loss will come and it will come quickly because you're cutting out the whole food group and especially the high protein intake probably is dehydrating you a lot, so you're losing a lot of weight quickly. It's really a new branding for the old Atkins and low carb diets that were out there forever, and they always come back in a different name, because keto is more about eating high fat, but really what most people are doing when they say keto, they just do a low carb diet. So I think, and for some people also, I want to say for some people that really works. Some people thrive on those diets and they feel good, and they're not even struggling to keep that lifestyle, and they're healthy, they have good blood work, and then that's fine. I'm really somebody who supports people in whatever makes them feel good, but also I really don't want to see people push themselves towards this diet when it doesn't make them feel good, because to your question, no, it's not something we have to be doing. It's not, if it worked for your friend, it doesn't mean it's going to be good for you. And carbs are definitely not evil, even though it's been pushed on us for so many years. And I was definitely there. I was terrified of eating carbs. And I remember to this day when I was kind of going through this recovery for myself, and I had bread, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm not even scared anymore.
Oh, wow.
So, it's carbs are actually good for us. It's people really don't want to hear it. And I think carbs just get thrown into this one big basket of like, we throw cupcakes and
Yeah.
I don't know, chips and all these things into one basket with rice and whole grains and whole wheat bread. And it's just like, those are good things. All this fiber is helping us with things like diabetes, but many other things. We need fiber for digestive health. There's so much research out there about how gut health influences our whole body, and we need fiber for that. And fiber is only found in like carbs, like fiber is a carb in a way. So it's more about what kinds of carbs are we eating. Are we choosing whole grains, fruits, veggies? I mean, vegetables are carbs. Are they bad for us? No. It's more about that balance. And people always try to find a diet that's to my point exactly. We're always trying to cut things out or find this magic solution. And even though it sounds simple, it's always about finding the balance, even including fun foods in your diet and being able to maintain your health with that without having to control your intake or cut out things.
So how do we, you brought up some amazing points. I'm so glad you mentioned all of that first and foremost. But how do we get to that point where we're not necessarily obsessing over every meal and sitting down and having dinner with our friends seems enjoyable, but we're also, eating foods that are balanced and healthy and that will take care and heal our body. How do we get to that balance in our own
Yeah.
personal?
I mean, it always sounds so easy. And sometimes I know that I say that and people think, well, yeah, that sounds great. I'm glad you can do that. But it's work. It's really a lot of work, and a lot of the support system plays a huge role. Like who are the people that we go to dinner with? Is it your friends who keep making mean comments about what you ordered, and are you able to communicate with them? I'm not saying to cut people out of your life, but maybe you want to share something you learned about
Yeah.
foods and why that comment was not the best comment. Or even our families can be such a huge trigger. Just our parents making comments, or our relatives, whoever that is. And it's definitely tough. And that's why I like working with people one on one and helping them through that. There's a lot of resources out there. I think a lot of people, there's a book out there, it's actually called Intuitive Eating. And I think it's for a lot of people the first step to kind of understanding um, what dieting does to us and how we can start changing that, even that book is a great tool to use in counseling, because I think those things are hard to do just by yourself. And if you've been dieting since you're a teenager, which most of us have, there's research out there that most 12-year-old girls have already been on a diet. And if you're now in your 40s and you've been obsessing over food since you're, I don't know, 12, 15, 18, no matter when it started, it's hard to just say, oh, I'm going to just have a balanced diet and not worry. It takes a lot of work and a lot of unlearning. And no matter if it's a dietitian or a therapist, or even maybe a friend that's really good at understanding you and supporting you, you can never just do that alone and just start doing something that's so counterintuitive to many of us.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned about family and friends too, because it's a double-edged sword, because if you gain too much weight in someone's eyes, some people will give you those mean comments, and then your size 4 or 2, and then you may not want the slice of cake at the birthday party, and then you're getting targeted as well. It's like, again, like you said, people have to find their own balance and what happiness and proper nutrition looks like for them. But I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I just want to put that out there for people to be mindful and kind with their words
Yeah.
to people. Food bullying is really a crazy and serious thing, because
Yeah.
you never know the effects that it's going to have on somebody in private.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, especially our obsession with complimenting people on being thin sometimes is so many times people are going through something extremely stressful and they lose weight, and we give them comments and they're just so unwell. But it
Right.
can be very triggering, because then you're like, oh well, I mean, I haven't been eating because I'm depressed, so maybe I just stick to it because people think I look great. And it can really be a lot of those stories start with somebody saying something about your body, and then it just sparks something
Yeah.
and you go down a rabbit hole.
Yes. Oh,
So
absolutely. You're so right. Because it goes back to how I mentioned earlier about as soon as I gave birth to my first child, immediately, by the time I went back to work in 8 weeks, I had it in my head, I have to go back wearing the same size clothes that I was before I left, and that's unhealthy. I
yeah,
mean, I'm going to say it, it's very unhealthy.
yeah,
And so I have to ask you, why do you think women, I think we have a lot of women here that probably will understand this and say that it's clear, but why are women under so much pressure to maintain a certain size?
yeah. I mean, I actually think there's many reasons for that. First of all, the unrealistic standards that we always see in the media, and I have to say, as a model, I remember seeing so many of my pictures published in like magazines or somewhere, and I was like, why did they Photoshop me? Like,
Yeah.
why? I don't get it.
Yeah.
Or when you see all these pictures and you have to make a crazy pose just so your leg looks longer, or they pin things to you in a crazy way. It never is the way it looks. Like,
Yeah.
almost nobody looks the way that the pictures make you think. And I
Right.
think it's really horrible, and apparently it's changing, although from what my friends are telling me, it's not really, it's just changing on paper.
Ooh, okay.
um, So, although there is more, I think there is more inclusivity in like what we're seeing in the media. That, to
Mhm.
be fair, we're seeing more diverse body types and different sizes too. But it still is problematic what we're constantly seeing, and especially now with the social media and everybody has access to an app to just like adjust whichever body part they don't like, and all these filters that make everybody look the same. I feel like it's actually going like in a different direction than we would like it to go. um, but then also I think just the pressure of constantly having to please people. Like, women are under so much pressure to generally like do well in all areas of life, and they have to be liked and kind and beautiful and whatever, and just so many roles we have to play. And I think looks are a huge part of it, that we think somehow will make things better. Like, so many people tell me they want to lose weight because they think they'll be a better person if they lose weight, and it's just, that's not how it works, but we still are conditioned to think so, for a reason.
Wow, that's so sad. And just because you're a size 4, 6, or even 8 does not even mean that you're healthy. I mean, you just never know. I want to also ask you, children are constantly targeted with so many ads to promote unhealthy food. I know we have a lot of moms joining us in this conversation today. So how do we help our kids develop healthy eating habits?
Yeah, I think this is a very deep question in a way, because there's also so much to it. But I think mainly just that the book I actually referred to, Intuitive Eating, goes into that a little bit, but from a different perspective, where they kind of remind us of, remember when you were a kid and you just knew when you're hungry and when you're done eating, and you never really double guessed yourself. And then I think a lot of times it's actually us as adults telling kids what to do. And a lot of people actually that I work with, and that's like a common, like, it's known among dietitians that a lot of people have problems to stop eating when they're, even if they're full, because they're so conditioned by that, like, clean plate clap, and you always have to finish your plate no matter what. And that's something that's so hard to unlearn. and, and it's, I think, just kind of trusting kids that they know what's good for them in a way. And that's super scary. And I don't have kids, so I don't really know if I would be able to do that. It's just the theory. But children really have amazing instincts. And I think even though sometimes maybe we think, oh, that's not enough, that's too little or something, trying to trust them a little bit, while also um, what is important is the exposure to food. So a kid will never ask for broccoli, but if we show that, like, if we give them that broccoli on their plate every day consistently, even though maybe they don't try it, but it's still there, and every day they see it and they see I'm also eating it and I like it, they will at some point have it. And being exposed to those different foods, like a big variety of foods, and just seeing them, seeing that they're good, that the adults also enjoy them, I think plays a huge role. And that's like a big rule in like infant nutrition. Keep offering, even if they reject, just keep offering. And at some point, they'll just be curious and they'll try, and then maybe they like it.
Oh, you know what? You mentioned that you're not a mother, but as a mom, I totally agree with everything that you're saying. Because I had to unlearn, and I'm still working on myself, some very unhealthy eating patterns. And so I've noticed I have a daughter and then I have a son. My daughter's 7 and my son is 3. But I had some family members. My daughter's very, she's lean. She eats, like you said, when she's hungry. I ask her, are you hungry? And she doesn't have to finish her plate. We'll put it in the refrigerator or something like that when she's done. But I've had family members comment on her weight, saying that she's too thin. And she's not. Like, she's a kid. She knows when she's hungry, and that's perfectly fine. And she'll eat. And some days she eats more when she's more active. It just fluctuates. And so those kind of comments, even around her, are so damaging.
Yeah.
And I don't think people really realize the power of their words. But I noticed having a little girl, and then my son, he has a larger appetite, even though he's only 3. But the comments are more uplifting towards him, like, oh, he's muscular, and but then towards her, it's sometimes from the same people, it's almost like talking down. And so I always have to make sure I position myself to defend, because when you know better, you do better. But it's sad. It's really, really sad. We really have to protect our children and help them, like you said, trust them that they also know and understand what's good for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always a balance of like providing what they might need, but then also trusting that they'll make the right choice. But I think you also said something very interesting, going back to our conversation about why do women always feel so pressured to look a certain way. And I think you summed it up perfectly, just the difference in how people comment on your daughter versus your son
Mhm.
just tells us a lot about us as a society, how we see girls and boys. And if a girl's chubby, maybe she should stop eating. But if a boy's chubby, he's cute.
Right,
That's
exactly. It's so true. It's so true. Women, you gotta feed your men. But I also want to ask you. So, what do you think about the lunch programs at school? Have you done any work with mothers or with schools in general to see, what they're feeding children and things like that? And what are your thoughts on like the balanced nutrition that children are receiving at public schools or even private schools?
Yeah, so I don't know if that, I think that differs from state to state, right? That the regular the different programs, but I have actually worked with a organization here in New York. It's called New York Enrichment Group, and they are kind of the biggest. Um, they are a group of dietitians who work with school lunch and after school programs to help them um, meet the criteria, because the those programs have to meet certain criteria to be approved, and to get that, so that the programs can get the money back, because they won't if they're not meeting nutritional needs of the children. There's like a certain amount of dairy that has to be provided, a certain amount of fruits and vegetables, and so we helped make those menus. And it was throughout the pandemic, so it was actually a big project because we're helping them with making it all to go, which is a whole other problem, because then you have to make it safe. And
Oh,
but doesn't matter. I just think it is a great way to, especially in a city like New York, and like I mentioned, food insecurity has been such a big problem throughout the pandemic. And again, the numbers show that mostly who suffers is single mothers and children. They have the biggest problems when it comes to food insecurity, and single, not even mothers, but like single parents in general, I think, is the data. And because those are the people who have the least time to prepare meals, to cook, and like, let alone complicated meals, that's usually the people who will make something quick, and there's a lot of food insecurity there. And those school lunches are a great way to make sure that the kids get at least one meal per day that's nutritious, or like meeting their nutritional needs. um, and then some of those after school programs, they actually have, I think, one meal and two snacks that they have to provide. So there's a lot of opportunities to help children meet their needs. However, I just don't know if every program is so diligent about, you know, the quality. And even here, I mean, the budget is still limited.
yeah.
And there was a lot of things like sugary cereal as the grain, because there was whole grain Cheerios. Um, and, you know, it's just, they are doing their best, and still there's a fruit to go with it. So it's still better than nothing, but I think we could definitely improve them somehow, and make sure that maybe also the food industry has less of an influence on that. But then we have to do a better job in funding those programs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't, think of a better way to end this conversation. You have given us a ton of information that definitely needed to spark conversation, both in our homes, outside of our homes, and just personally as well. Just to make sure that we are living as healthy as we possibly can with our nutritional uh, plan. I don't want to say diet. I'm trying to avoid using that word diet. But just make sure we're taking care of our minds and our bodies, and more so doing, like you said, intuitive eating. So I'm so grateful that you took the time out to have this conversation with us. Martina says, I needed this. I'll make sure to watch the full episode tomorrow. Thank you for the great information, and everyone else have some major takeaways from this discussion. Moderation is
Yay.
key. Yes.
Thank you. I'm so happy to hear this.
Yes, thank you. Do you have any final comments that you would like to make?
No, I think just kind of summing it up, saying, going back to what you said, trying to avoid the word diet. It's really
Um,
not about, healthy eating is not about dieting. It's the opposite. It's finding a balance with all the foods, and being able to include fun foods without guilt, like a piece of cake and then moving on, and it's fine. And
yeah.
yeah, and all these other factors are always important. It's not just about what we eat, it's so much about how we feel mentally. What is the stress level? Are we moving our bodies? Are we getting fresh air? So I think that's something I want people to remember.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm definitely going to take note of that too, and I hope all of you all do that as well, and make sure that we're taking care of our body. Our body is our temple. We only get one of these. And so, when we take care of ourselves, we're able to then, take care of others. A lot of us are parents, or we have family members and just people in general that we interact with. We have to make sure, like Paula says, that we are providing our bodies with the proper balance and nutrition that it needs. And so, Paula, I thank you so much for taking time out today to have this discussion with us. If anyone would like to get in contact with Paula over at Happy Nutrition, I will share her comment and contact information below, so you can contact her directly for any detailed conversation. But again, thank you all for blooming with us today and joining us for the conversation. And Paula, I hope you have a great night, and thank you again, and I will talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. Have a great night.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.